On the morning of April 14th, 1847, deep in Louisiana's plantation country, a prosperous landowner named Henri Laval gave his wife an anniversary gift that would ultimately ruin 3 lives. The gift came wrapped not in paper, but in a plain cotton dress. A 12-year-old girl named Rose purchased from a neighboring estate for $200. What Madame Laval did not know, what servants whispered about in the quarters after nightfall, what account books and letters concealed in Henry's study would one day reveal, was that Rose carried his blood. She was his daughter. For 15 years, this secret festered within the elegant rooms of Belmont House, seeping into every corner, corroding everything it touched, until the truth surfaced in a manner that shocked even a society accustomed to unspeakable cruelties. The records were destroyed, witnesses intimidated into silence, and the official version of events buried beneath layers of cultivated respectability. But some truths refused to remain hidden. Before continuing with the story of the Laval family and the girl who became the center of their undoing, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss stories like this one. And tell me, where are you listening from? Leave a comment below with your state or city. Now, let's step back to where this tragedy truly began, more than a decade before that fateful anniversary morning. The story of Rose Laval, though she would never be allowed to carry that name, did not begin in Louisiana, but on a smaller plantation in Mississippi in 1835. Her mother, a woman named Dinah, worked in the main house of the Mercier family, where Henri Laval was a frequent visitor during his years as a young bachelor, building his fortune through cotton speculation. Dinah was known for her fine needlework and her quiet dignity, qualities that made her valuable to household and, unfortunately, visible to Henri. Henri Laval had arrived in Mississippi in 1833 at the age of 28, with ambitions far greater than his modest inheritance. His family were minor merchants in New Orleans, respectable but not wealthy, and certainly not connected to the old Creole aristocracy that still dominated Louisiana society. Henri understood that in the rapidly expanding cotton economy of the 1830s, fortunes could be made quickly by men willing to take risks and act without the restraints of old money's cautious conservatism. The Mercier Plantation, Belle Reve, was one of several properties where Henri conducted business during those early years. He traded in cotton futures, arranged shipping contracts, and cultivated relationships with planters who would become his path to wealth and social advancement. Old Monsieur Mercier, a widower whose own sons had died of yellow fever, seemed to appreciate Henry's energy and sharp business sense. Henri became a regular guest at Belle Reve, sometimes staying for weeks at a time during the demanding harvest seasons. It was during one of these extended visits, in the summer of 1834, that Henri first truly noticed Dinah. She was 23 years old, born on the Mercier property, and had worked in a house since childhood. Her mother had been a skilled seamstress, and Dinah had inherited that talent, along with grace and intelligence that set her apart. She could read. Before her death, Madame Mercier had taught several of the house servants their letters, a practice that was technically illegal, but quietly tolerated in many households. What occurred between Henri and Dinah was never written down in any diary or correspondence, never acknowledged in polite society. But those who worked at Belle Reve during that period would later recall seeing them together in the sewing room, where Dinah mended linens, and Henri would sometimes appear with questions about fabric orders or household accounts. They remembered the way Henri looked at her and the way she lowered her eyes, though not before something passed between them that went beyond the usual dynamic between master and enslaved woman. The relationship, if it can be called that, continued to the fall of 1834. Henri was young, far from home, and moving through a world where white men's access to enslaved women was an accepted reality, rarely questioned and never punished. Dinah had no power to refuse, no protection, no choice. Whether there was any genuine affection involved or whether it was simply another exercise of power disguised as intimacy is impossible to know. What is certain is that by December of 1834, Dinah knew she was pregnant. She told no one at first. In a world where enslaved women's bodies were not their own, Pregnancy was always fraught with danger. It could increase a woman's value as a potential mother of more enslaved children, or it could lead to punishment if the father was white and the situation threatened public embarrassment. Dinah watched and waited, tried to judge what Henry's response might be, whether he would accept any responsibility or simply return to New Orleans and leave her to face the consequences alone. Henry left Belle Reve in January of 1835, returning to New Orleans for the social season. He did not return to Mississippi that spring. Whether he knew of Dinah's pregnancy before he departed, or whether he simply moved on to other ventures and other plantations, the surviving records do not say. By the time Rose was born in August of 1835, Henri Laval was already courting Celeste Dufresne in New Orleans, already constructing a respectable life that would eventually lead to marriage in his rise as a prominent planter. Dinah gave birth to Rose in the quarters at Belle Reve, attended by other enslaved women who acted as midwives and nurses. The child was lighter-skinned than her mother, with features that became more pronounced as she grew. The shape of her eyes, the line of her jaw, the way she carried herself. To anyone who had known Henri Laval, the resemblance would eventually be impossible to ignore. Monsieur Mercier was not considered a cruel man by the standard of his time, but he was practical. He understood what Rose's existence implied and the delicate situation it created. He also understood that Henri Laval was becoming an increasingly valuable business connection, a young man on the path to considerable wealth and influence. And so Mercier made a decision. Dinah and her daughter would remain at Belle Reve. They would be treated well, and the matter would not be spoken of. It was a solution that preserved everyone's dignity, or at least the outward appearance of it. Rose grew up in the quarters at Belle Reve, learning to work beside her mother. She was an intelligent child, quick to absorb new skills, and Dinah taught her everything she knew about sewing and the management of a household. But Dinah also taught her daughter something else, something far more essential for survival. She taught her how to be invisible, how to keep her eyes lowered and her thoughts concealed, how to move through a world that regarded her as property rather than a person. These lessons would serve Rose well in the years ahead, though they could not shield her from everything that awaited her. Henri Laval visited Belle Reve from time to time during Rose's childhood, though far less often than he had in his bachelor days. He was married now, firmly established on his own plantation in Louisiana, consumed with the expansion of his cotton empire. Still, when he did appear, he would occasionally notice Rose, a child playing in the yard, or helping her mother carry linens, or standing silently in a corner while the adults discussed business. And each time he saw her, something tightened in his chest, a mix of guilt and recognition, and an unsettling, unwelcome sense of pride. She was his daughter. He could never acknowledge her, could never claim her, but she was his. By 1847, Rose was 12 years old, and the resemblance of Henri had become impossible to dismiss. Old Monsieur Mercier had died the year before, and his estate was now being managed by a nephew who felt no particular loyalty to Henri Laval and had no reason to preserve the quiet arrangement that had protected Dinah and Rose. The nephew was consolidating the property, selling off assets, and preparing to relocate to Mobile, where he had other business interests. Several of the enslaved people at Belle Reve were slated for sale, and Rose was among them. When word of this reached Henri through business channels, through the informal networks that linked planters and merchants across the South, he made a decision that would prove catastrophic for everyone involved. He would buy Rose. He would bring her to Bellamont House. He told himself it was an act of protection, that he was ensuring she would end up in a relatively safe household rather than being sold to strangers. But something else drove the choice as well, something darker and far more complicated. Perhaps it was guilt, or perhaps it was a twisted need to keep his daughter close, to have her under his roof where he could see her, even if he could never acknowledge who she truly was. Whatever his reasoning, Henri Laval set into motion the events that would destroy his marriage, his reputation, and ultimately his life. The transaction was handled through an intermediary, as such sensitive matters often were. In March of 1847, Henri arranged for a business associate, named Charles DuPont to approach the Mercier nephew about purchasing several enslaved people, including a 12-year-old girl trained in household work. The price was reasonable, $200, standard for a healthy young servant with domestic skills. The paperwork was routine, just another bill of sale. In a society where thousands of such documents were produced every year, nothing about it drew attention. Dinah was not included in the sale. The separation of mother and child was common enough in the slave trade to provoke little comment. Those who witnessed Dinah's grief that day, however, never forgot it. She held Rose for as long as she was allowed to, whispering something into her ear that no one else could hear. In later years, those who had been present would wonder what Dinah had told her daughter in those final moments. A warning, a blessing, instructions for survival. Whatever the words were, Rose carried them with her as she was loaded into the wagon that would take her to Louisiana. The journey from Belle Reve to Belmont House took 4 days. Rose traveled with 3 other enslaved people purchased by various buyers in the region, 2 field hands and a woman intended to work as a cook. They were chained together in the back of the wagon, given little food or water, and made to sleep on the ground at night. It was Rose's first direct encounter with the brutal reality of being sold, of being transported like livestock from one owner to another. She had lived her entire life at Belle Reve, known only one place and one community. Now she was being carried toward a strange household to serve people she had never met for reasons she could not comprehend. Rose arrived at Belmont House on April 10th, 4 days before Laval's 9th wedding anniversary. The plantation was larger and more imposing than Belle Reve, with a main house that seemed enormous to Rose's young eyes, 2 stories of white-painted wood, tall columns, wide galleries, and grounds dotted with gardens and outbuildings. The quarters where the enslaved people lived were set well back from the main house, a line of small cabins housing the 40-some individuals who worked the cotton fields and maintained the estate. Rose was kept in the quarters at first, given time to adjust to her new surroundings. The other house servants watched her with a mix of curiosity and unease. New arrivals always unsettled the existing order, and Rose was particularly puzzling. She was lighter-skinned than most, clearly chosen with care, and there was something about the way Madame Laval had looked at her upon her arrival, a look the older servants recognized, and that made them uneasy. An elderly woman named Judith, who had worked at Belmont House for 30 years and served as the unofficial leader of the house staff, pulled Rose aside on her second day. They stood in the kitchen, where Rose was being shown the layout and daily routines. "Child," Judith said quietly, making sure no one else was near enough to hear, "you need to understand something. You're in a dangerous position here. I don't know what the master is thinking, bringing you into this house, but it isn't good. You keep your head down. You do your work. And you don't give Madam any reason to notice you more than necessary. Do you understand?" Rose nodded, though she did not truly understand. She was 12 years old, torn from her mother and everything familiar, focused only on surviving one day at a time. The deeper implications of the position she had been placed in were far beyond her grasp. On the morning of April 14th, Henri called Rose into the main house. It was early before Celeste had risen, and the rooms were quiet except for the muted sounds of the kitchen staff preparing breakfast. Henri met Rose in the hallway outside his study, and for a long moment he did nothing but look at her. In the pale morning light filtering through the tall windows, the resemblance between them was undeniable. The same eyes, the same shape of face, the same manner of holding themselves. Henri felt that familiar tightening in his chest, that blend of guilt and recognition he had felt so many times before. "You are to be a gift from Madame," he said at last, his tone formal and distant. "For our anniversary, you will work directly under her supervision, assisting with her wardrobe and her personal needs. You will be respectful, obedient, and discreet. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Rose replied quietly, keeping her eyes lowered, just as Dinah had taught her. Henri wanted to say more. He wanted to ask about Dinah, about Rose's childhood at Belle Reve, about whether she was frightened or confused. He wanted to tell her that he was her father, that he had brought her here to protect her, that she would be safe under his roof. But he said none of it. To speak those words would have been to acknowledge a truth that could never be acknowledged, to fracture the carefully maintained facade of his respectable life. Instead, he simply nodded and summoned Judith, instructing her to take Rose away and prepare her for the presentation. Rose was dressed in a new cotton gown, pale blue with white trim, finer than anything she had ever worn. Her hair was arranged with care, braided and pinned in the style Celeste preferred for the house servants. A white apron was tied over the dress, marking her as part of the household staff. Then she was made to wait in the hallway, while Henri went to fetch his wife. Celeste was in the morning room when Henri brought Rose to her. The anniversary breakfast had been laid out on a small table by the window, fine china decorated with delicate floral patterns, fresh flowers from the garden arranged in a crystal vase, every detail a display of cultivated domestic order. Celeste wore a morning gown of pale yellow silk, her dark hair styled in the elaborate fashion she favored. She was 38 years old, still striking in the severe way of women who had learned to wield their appearance as a form of authority. "My dear," Henri said, his voice carrying the formal courtesy that had defined their marriage for years, "I have an anniversary gift for you. This girl, Rose, has been trained in household work and personal service. I thought she might be useful to you, to assist with your wardrobe and other needs." Celeste examined Rose with the practiced eye of a woman accustomed to assessing property. She noted the girl's light complexion, the quality of her features, the new dress that was noticeably finer than those worn by the other house servants. She noticed the way Henri stood just a little too close to the child, the subtle change in his voice when he spoke of her. Then Celeste truly looked at Rose's face and saw something that made her blood turn cold. The girl had Henri's eyes, the same unusual gray-green shade, the same shape, the same way of gazing out at the world. Once seen, it cannot be unseen. Something cracked inside Celeste's chest, some final illusion about her marriage splintering as surely as the crystal vase would have shattered if she had hurled it against the wall. But Celeste had been trained since childhood in the art of appearances, never to reveal emotion in public, never to surrender dignity, no matter how deep the private wound. So she smiled a flawless, frozen smile and inclined her head. "How thoughtful of you, Henri," she said, her voice smooth as silk and just as cold. "I'm sure she will be very useful. Rose, you may go to the kitchen and help with clearing the breakfast dishes. I will call for you when I need you." Rose curtsied, just as Judith had taught her the night before, and fled the room. She could feel the tension between Monsieur and Madame Laval, could sense that something terrible had been set in motion, even if she could not understand what it was. In the kitchen, she stood trembling in a corner while the other servants exchanged knowing looks. Henri and Celeste were left alone in the morning room. They sat down to their anniversary breakfast, and for several minutes neither spoke. Henri ate mechanically, barely tasting the food. Celeste sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her expression composed. At last, Henri said, "She's a good worker. The Mercier family spoke highly of her training." "The Mercier family," Celeste repeated softly. "In Mississippi, where you spent so much time before we were married." Henry's hand froze halfway to his mouth. He set his fork down with deliberate care. "Yes, I did business with them for several years." "And this girl," Celeste continued, her voice still calm, still carefully controlled, "she was born there, on the Mercier plantation." "I believe so. How old is she?" 12. Celeste did the calculation in her head. 12 years old. Born in 1835. Henri had been doing business with the Mercier family in 1834 and 1835, before their marriage, before he had even begun courting her. "She has your eyes," Celeste said at last, looking directly at her husband. "Did you think I wouldn't notice?" Henri said nothing. What could he say? Denial would insult them both. Admission would force them to confront a truth their society relied on elaborate fictions to avoid. "I see," Celeste said after a long silence. She rose, smoothing her skirt with hands that trembled only slightly. "Thank you for the anniversary gift, Henri. It's very illuminating." She left the morning room with her head held high, her back straight, every inch the aristocratic woman she had been raised to be. But inside, Celeste Dufresne-Laval was calculating, planning, and nurturing a rage that would poison everything it touched for the next 15 years. The first weeks of Rose's life at Bellamont House established patterns that would endure for years. She was assigned to work directly under Celeste's supervision, which meant she was constantly in the mistress's presence. She helped Celeste dress each morning, arrange her hair, maintain her wardrobe, serve her meals when they were taken in private, and attended to countless small tasks throughout the day. Celeste was never overtly cruel. There were no beatings, no deliberate starvation, nothing that would have drawn comment from visitors or other staff. But there was a coldness in the way she treated Rose, a particular intensity of attention that felt less like supervision and more like constant scrutiny. She watched Rose constantly, studying her face, measuring her features against Henry's, and she found countless ways to remind the girl, quietly but relentlessly, of her absolute powerlessness. Rose would be made to stand for hours holding objects while Celeste deliberated over whether to use them, a shawl, a book, a fan. She would be sent to retrieve an item from another room, only to be told upon returning that it was a wrong one, that she should have known better, that she needed to pay closer attention. She was assigned tasks that could never be completed to perfection. Mending linens with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible, polishing silver until not a single fingerprint remained, arranging flowers in vases according to precise instructions that changed the moment Rose thought she understood them. This was work designed not for efficiency, but for domination, for the constant reinforcement of Rose's helplessness and Celeste's unquestioned authority. And it worked. Within a month, Rose had learned to move through the house like a shadow, silent and unobtrusive, doing everything she could to avoid drawing attention to herself. The other enslaved people at Bellamont House understood the situation, or at least enough of it to know that Rose occupied a strange and dangerous place. Some pitied her. Judith, the elderly woman who had tried to warn Rose on her first day, would sometimes slip her extra food or offer a quiet word of kindness when Celeste was not watching. But others resented her for the attention she received, even if that attention was poisonous. She was a house servant, which already set her apart from field hands. She worked directly for Madame, which gave her a certain status. And there was a matter of her light skin, her obvious resemblance to the master, the special care taken with her even before she arrived at Bellamont House. Rose had no true friends in the quarters, no one she trusted completely. She was isolated by the very secret that defined her existence, suspended between two worlds and belonging fully to neither. While Rose struggled to survive, Celeste began her own quiet investigation. She was a methodical woman, patient and precise. She understood that suspicion alone was not enough. She needed confirmation. She needed to know exactly what had happened between Henri and this girl's mother, to understand the full measure of her husband's betrayal. She began by writing letters, seemingly casual correspondence to acquaintances in Mississippi, women she had met during visits to New Orleans, the wives of planters who had done business with Henri. The letters were filled with polite chatter and social formalities, but threaded through them were carefully chosen questions. Did you know the Mercier family? Such a tragedy about old Monsieur Mercier's death. I hear they've sold several of their people recently. There's a girl, Rose, who came to work for us. Such a well-trained child. Do you know anything of her background? The replies arrived slowly over the summer of 1847. Most contained nothing of value, vague pleasantries, expressions of sympathy for the Mercier family, harmless gossip. Then in August, a letter came from a woman named Madame Rousseau, whose husband owned a plantation neighboring Belle Reve. Madame Rousseau's letters were always rich with gossip. She wrote about the weather, the cotton crop, local scandals, and social events. And then, almost as an aside, she wrote, "You mentioned the girl Rose who has come to work for you. Yes, I remember her mother, Dinah, such a talented seamstress. There was some talk years ago about the circumstances of Rose's birth. You know how people gossip. Your husband was a frequent visitor at Belle Reve in those days. Before your marriage, of course. I'm sure it's nothing, just the usual plantation rumors. But the girl does have rather distinctive features, doesn't she? Celeste read the letter 3 times, standing by the window in her bedroom as the afternoon light spilled across the page. The language was cautious, the implications delicately veiled, but the meaning was unmistakable. Her suspicions were confirmed. Rose was Henry's daughter, born of a relationship with an enslaved woman during his bachelor years in Mississippi. That evening, Celeste confronted Henri in his study. It was after dinner, and the house had gone quiet. She closed the door behind her and stood before his desk, Madame Rousseau's letter clenched in her hand. "I know," she said simply. Henri looked up from the ledger he had been reviewing. He saw the letter, saw the expression on his wife's face, and understood at once what she meant. "Celeste, Don't," she cut in sharply. "Don't insult me with denials or explanations. I know what you did. I know who that girl is. And I know that you brought her into this house, into my household, as some sort of what? Penance? A misguided attempt at protection? A way to keep your bastard daughter close, while preserving your respectable facade." Henri rose from his chair, his face flushing. "It wasn't like that. I was trying to help her. The Mercier estate was being broken up. She would have been sold off to God knows where. I thought if I brought her here—" "You thought you could have it both ways," Celeste said coldly. "You thought you could keep your daughter as your slave, see her every day, soothe your conscience by protecting her, all without ever acknowledging what you did or facing any real consequences. And you thought I would never know, or that if I did, I would accept it silently like a dutiful wife. What do you want to do?" Henri asked, his voice weary. "She's here now. She's a child. Whatever happened with her mother was 12 years ago, before we were married. I can't change the past." "No," Celeste agreed, "but you can change the present. You can sell her, send her away, remove this reminder of your indiscretion from my house." Henri shook his head. "I won't do that. She's safe here. She's being treated well. To sell her now would be to condemn her to who knows what." "How noble of you," Celeste said, her voice heavy with sarcasm. "How very noble. To keep your slave daughter in your household, so you can feel virtuous about protecting her while she waits on your wife. Do you not see how twisted this is? How deeply insulting it is to me to have to look at her every day, to see your eyes staring back at me from her face?" "I'm sorry," Henri said quietly. "I'm sorry for all of it, but I won't sell her. That's final." Celeste stared at her husband for a long moment. Then she smiled, a cold, terrible smile that made Henri take a step back. "Very well," she said. "She stays. But understand this, Henri. She is my property now. You gave her to me as a gift. And that means I decide how she is treated, what work she does, and what happens to her. You have absolved yourself of responsibility by making her mine. So she is mine, and you will not interfere with how I choose to manage my own property." With that, she turned and left the study, leaving Henri standing alone among his ledgers and account books, surrounded by the tangible proof of his wealth and success, and feeling more powerless than he had ever felt in his life. From that night forward, the atmosphere at Bellamont House shifted into something darker. Celeste's treatment of Rose grew sharper, more deliberately cruel in its small details. Tasks became more tedious, expectations more impossible, criticism more constant, and Henri, bound by his own words and his own guilt, could do nothing but watch. The years between 1847 and 1852 saw Rose change from a frightened child into a young woman trapped in an impossible position. By then, through overheard conversations and the way Celeste's gaze lingered on her, Rose understood the truth. Henri was her father, but the knowledge brought no comfort and no protection. If anything, it made her situation more dangerous. Rose learned to read Celeste's moods, to anticipate her needs, to make herself as invisible as possible. She learned which rooms to avoid when Madame was in one of her darker tempers, which tasks were most likely to be approved, which silences were safest. It was an education in survival, in navigating a world where she had no power and no protection. Henri avoided Rose whenever he could. When their paths did cross, his expression carried guilt mixed with something else. Perhaps regret, perhaps resentment that she existed as a living reminder of his past indiscretion and his present moral failure. He never spoke to her directly if he could help it, never acknowledged a bond between them. To do so would have meant admitting the truth, and admission was impossible. Still, there were moments when the facade cracked. Once, when Rose was 14, she was carrying a heavy tray of dishes from the dining room to the kitchen when she stumbled on the stairs. The tray fell, and china shattered across the floor. Rose froze, knowing such carelessness usually meant punishment. Being denied dinner, perhaps even being whipped by the overseer if Celeste was angry enough. Henri had been in the hallway and saw the accident. He saw the fear on Rose's face, and something inside him gave way. He called for Judith to clean up the mess and told Rose to go to the kitchen. When Celeste came to investigate the noise and demanded to know who was responsible, Henri said it had been another servant, that the matter had already been handled, that she need not trouble herself. It was a small act of protection, a small lie, but it was all Henri could offer. And Rose, standing in the kitchen and listening to her father lie to shield her, felt a tangled mix of gratitude and grief. He was her father, and he cared enough to protect her in that moment. But he did not care enough to free her, to acknowledge her, to give her any real safety or any real future. As Rose grew older, new dangers emerged. She was becoming a young woman, and on southern plantations that meant a different kind of vulnerability. The enslaved men at Belmont House generally left her alone. She was too closely associated with the master and mistress, too risky to approach. But visitors came to the plantation, Henry's business associates, men who stayed for days or weeks. And there were the white men who worked there, the overseer, the bookkeeper, the tradesmen who came and went. Rose learned to avoid being alone with any of them. She learned to remain near the main house, where Celeste's presence offered a strange form of protection. Celeste might despise her, might make her life miserable in countless subtle ways, but she had a vested interest in controlling her household and her property. No one would touch Rose without Celeste's permission, and Celeste was not inclined to grant it. But in 1850, when Rose was 15, that balance began to shift. Henri hired a new overseer named Thomas Garrett to manage the field operations at Belmont. Garrett was a hard man, typical of his profession. He had worked on plantations throughout Louisiana and Mississippi and was known for enforcing discipline and maximizing productivity. He also believed that his position entitled him to certain privileges, including access to enslaved women. Garrett noticed Rose almost immediately. She was beautiful in a way that was difficult to ignore. Light-skinned, delicate-featured, moving with a grace that set her apart from the others. And there was something else, something in her bearing that suggested she was different, special, connected to the master's household in some meaningful way. Garrett began paying attention to her, finding reasons to linger near the main house, making comments that started as casual observations and slowly grew more pointed. He complimented her appearance, asked about her work, remarked that she must get lonely spending all day in the big house. Rose recognized the danger at once. She had seen what happened to enslaved women who attracted the attention of white men, had heard the stories whispered in the corridors after dark. She tried to avoid Garrett, but it was difficult. He had legitimate reasons to be near the house, to report to Henri on the fields, to coordinate schedules and supplies with the house staff. He was careful in his pursuit, never doing anything blatant enough to be formally reported, never crossing a line in a way that could be clearly proved. Finally, Rose gathered the courage to speak to Celeste about Garrett's behavior. It was a desperate choice, but she hoped the mistress might intervene, if only to protect what she considered her own property. She waited until one morning when she was helping Celeste dress, and they were alone in the bedroom. "Madam," Rose said softly, her voice trembling. "I need to tell you something. The overseer, Mr. Garrett, he's been paying attention to me, saying things. I'm afraid of what he might do." Celeste continued fastening her dress, not looking at Rose. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, finally, she turned and regarded the girl with cold, assessing eyes. "You will manage your own difficulties," Celeste said flatly. "Do not bring such matters to me again. You are not a child anymore, Rose. You should be capable of handling the attention of men without running to me for protection." Something inside Rose collapsed. She had always known that Celeste despised her, had never expected kindness from the woman who owned her. But she had clung to the desperate hope that Celeste's sense of property, her need to control her household, would at least offer some measure of protection. Instead, Celeste was making it clear that Rose was entirely on her own, that whatever happened to her was her own burden to bear. "Yes, madam," Rose whispered and said nothing more. The rejection was devastating, but it also stripped away any remaining illusions. Henri would not protect her, because to do so would mean acknowledging who she was. Celeste would not protect her, because she wanted Rose to suffer. The other enslaved people could not protect her, because they had no power. Rose was trapped in a world where she was vulnerable to any white man who chose to take an interest in her, with no recourse and no hope of intervention. So she began a plan. It was a desperate plan, almost certainly doomed, but it was all she had. She would save every coin she could find, small tips from visitors, pennies discovered in the laundry, anything she could hide away. She would learn everything she could about the world beyond Bellamont House, routes north, rumors of people who helped those who escaped. And when the time was right, when she had gathered enough knowledge and whatever meager resources she could manage, she would run. It was a fantasy, really. The chances of a young enslaved woman escaping from Louisiana to freedom in the north were vanishingly small. Patrols were everywhere. The penalties for helping runaways were severe, and the distances were immense. But the fantasy gave Rose something to cling to, a fragment of agency in a life where she had none. The summer of 1852 brought the crisis that accelerated the tragedy unfolding at Bellamont House. Thomas Garrett's attention toward Rose had grown steadily more aggressive over the past 2 years. What had begun as comments had turned into touches. A hand on her arm as she passed in the yard, fingers brushing against hers when she handed him something, a grip on her shoulder that lingered far too long. Rose did everything she could to avoid being alone with him. But on a humid afternoon in July, her luck ran out. She was working in the laundry house behind the main building, a small structure where the household linens were washed and ironed. It was hot, exhausting labor, and Rose was alone. The woman who usually worked beside her was ill, confined to the quarters with a fever. Rose was bent over a washing tub, scrubbing a stained tablecloth. When she heard the door open behind her, she turned and saw Thomas Garrett standing in the doorway, blocking the only exit. He was smiling, but there was nothing kind in it. "Afternoon, Rose," he said, stepping inside and closing the door. "Thought I'd come see if you needed any help with that heavy work." "No, thank you, sir," Rose replied, forcing her voice to stay steady despite the fear tightening in her throat. "I'm managing fine." "Now, that's not very friendly," Garrett said, moving closer. "I've been trying to be nice to you for 2 years now, and you just keep running away. That's not polite, Rose. That's not respectful." Rose backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The laundry house was small, and Garrett stood between her and the door. She searched frantically for something, anything, she could use to defend herself, but there was nothing but tubs of water and piles of wet linens. "Please, sir," she said, hating the pleading tone in her voice but unable to stop it. "Please, just let me finish my work. Madam will be angry if the laundry isn't done." "Madam doesn't need to know about this," Garrett said, reaching for her. "This can be our little secret." What happened next unfolded quickly. Garrett seized Rose by the arm, yanking her toward him. She tried to pull away, and he struck her hard enough to make her ears ring. She stumbled backward, struck the edge of the washing tub, and fell. Garrett was on her at once, his weight crushing her, his hands tearing at her dress. Rose fought. She scratched at his face, tried to scream, kicked and twisted, struggling with everything she had. But Garrett was stronger, and now he was angry. Angry that she resisted, angry that she did not submit the way he believed she should. The struggle lasted several minutes, though to Rose it felt endless. At some point, she managed to grab a wooden washing paddle and strike him hard on the side of the head. Garrett reeled back, swearing, and Rose scrambled to her feet and ran. She burst from the laundry house and fled toward the main house, her dress torn, her face bruised and bleeding where Garrett had hit her. She could hear him shouting behind her, but she did not stop. She ran up the back stairs, past the stunned kitchen staff, and straight to Henry's study. Henry was at his desk when Rose burst in without knocking, a breach of protocol that would normally have brought immediate punishment. He looked up in shock, then saw her condition, the ripped dress, the bruises, the terror in her eyes. "What happened?" he demanded, rising to his feet. Rose stood before him, shaking, and spoke the words she had never been allowed to say, the words forbidden for 7 years. "You're my father," she said. "Please help me." The silence that followed was absolute. Henry stared at her, and in that moment he could not deny what she was, his daughter, standing before him with his own eyes, looking at him in desperate appeal. For a brief instant, something like recognition, perhaps even compassion, crossed his face. He saw her not as property, not as a problem to be managed, but as his child, a human being who needed his protection. Then Celeste appeared in the doorway. She had heard the commotion and followed Rose through the house. She stood there, perfectly composed despite the chaos, taking in the scene. Rose in her torn dress, Henry behind his desk with anguish written across his face, and forbidden words still hanging in the air between them. "Get out," Celeste said to Rose, her voice cold as ice. "Go to your quarters and stay there. Do not return to this house until you are sent for." Rose looked at Henry, searching his face for some sign that he would contradict his wife, that he would finally offer protection she had begged for. But Henry said nothing. He stood frozen, trapped between guilt and cowardice, incapable of acting. Rose fled. She ran to the quarters, to the small cabin she shared with 3 other house servants, and collapsed onto her pallet. The other women tried to comfort her, but Rose was beyond comfort. She had finally spoken the truth, had finally named her father, and he had done nothing. He had stood there and allowed Celeste to dismiss her, had chosen his wife and his reputation over his daughter's safety. Henri and Celeste were left alone in the study for another confrontation, more violent than any that had come before. The servants working nearby heard raised voices, heard something shatter, a glass or a vase hurled against the wall. The argument lasted more than an hour, conducted in a mixture of English and French, with accusations and recriminations that had been building for 5 years finally erupting. When Celeste emerged, her face was composed but pale, her hands trembling slightly as she summoned Judith, the head house servant. "Send for the sheriff," Celeste said, her voice perfectly controlled. "We've had a theft." Judith stared at her mistress, understanding instantly what was happening. "Madam," she began. "Now," Celeste snapped. "Send for the sheriff now." The accusation was simple and devastating. Rose had stolen a piece of jewelry from Celeste's room, a gold brooch that had belonged to Celeste's mother. It was valuable both financially and sentimentally, and its theft was treated as a serious crime. The brooch was found among Rose's belongings in the quarters, planted there by Celeste herself, though there was no way to prove it. The other enslaved people understood immediately that Rose was being framed, that this was Celeste's revenge for the scene in Henry's study, for Rose's claim of kinship, for 7 years of humiliation and suppressed rage. But there was nothing they could do. To speak out would invite punishment, and their words would not be believed. Enslaved people could not testify against white citizens in Louisiana courts. Rose was taken to the parish jail, that evening to await trial. She went quietly, knowing resistance would only worsen her situation. As she was led away, she looked back at the main house and saw Henri standing at the window of his study, watching. Their eyes met briefly, and Rose saw something in his expression that might have been grief or might have been guilt. Then he turned away, and she was taken to jail. Just when it seemed the horror at Bellamont House could go no further, it deepened. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with someone who loves dark mysteries. Hit the like button to support our work, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Now, let's see what happened next. Rose's trial for theft was scheduled for August 3rd, 1852, 3 weeks after her arrest. She spent those weeks in the parish jail, a small stone building that held perhaps a dozen prisoners at any given time. Conditions were harsh. She shared a cell with 2 other women, was given minimal food and water, and allowed outside only for brief periods each day. But the physical hardship was nothing compared to the psychological torment of knowing she was being punished not for anything she had done, but simply for existing, for being the living evidence of Henri Laval's past and Celeste Laval's humiliation. Henri visited the jail once during those 3 weeks. He came late at night, when few would see him, and asked to speak with Rose privately. The jailer, who knew Henri and relied on his goodwill for various business matters, allowed it. Father and daughter sat across from each other in the small visiting room, separated by a rough wooden table. For a long time, neither spoke. Henri looked at Rose, at her bruised face, her thin frame, the hopelessness in her eyes, and felt a shame so deep it was almost physical. "I'm sorry," he said at last. "I'm sorry for everything. For bringing you here, for not protecting you, for being too weak to do what I should have done." Rose said nothing. What was there to say? Sorry did not change anything. It did not free her from jail. It did not erase the past 7 years. It did not give her back her mother, her childhood, or any hope for the future. "The trial," Henri continued quietly. "Celeste is determined to see you convicted. She wants you sent to the state prison or sold out of state. I don't know exactly what she wants. Revenge, I suppose, for everything." "And what do you want?" Rose asked, speaking for the first time. Her voice was flat, stripped of emotion. Henri looked down at his hands. "I want to make this right, but I don't know how. If I testify that you didn't steal the brooch, Celeste will know I'm lying to protect you. It'll confirm everything she already suspects and make matters worse. But if I don't testify, you'll be convicted. There's no evidence in your favor, no witnesses who can speak for you. So I'm going to be convicted," Rose said, "and you're going to let it happen because protecting me would be inconvenient for you. It's not that simple." "Yes, it is," Rose interrupted, her voice suddenly sharp. "It's exactly that simple. You could free me. You could acknowledge me as your daughter and set me free. You have that power. But you won't, because it would cost you too much. Your reputation, your marriage, your place in society. So instead, you'll let me be convicted of a crime I didn't commit, and you'll tell yourself it's complicated, that there's nothing you can do." Henri had no answer because Rose was right. He did have the power to free her, to claim her, to give her a life. And he would not use it because the cost himself was too great. He was a coward, and they both knew it. He left the jail that night without another word, leaving Rose alone with the knowledge that her father had chosen his comfort over her freedom, his reputation over her life. The trial took place on a sweltering August morning in the parish courthouse. It was a brief proceeding, as such trials always were when the accused was enslaved and the accuser was white and wealthy. The courthouse was crowded. Trials like this were public entertainment, and a case involving the prominent Laval family had drawn a large crowd. Celeste testified first. She was calm and dignified, every inch the wrong lady. She described the brooch, a gold piece set with pearls and a small ruby, a gift from her mother on her wedding day, rich with sentimental value. She spoke of discovering it missing from her jewelry box, searching the house, and finally finding it concealed among Rose's belongings in the quarters. Her voice carried just the right degree of emotion, enough to convey injury without tipping into hysteria or excess. The sheriff testified next, confirming Celeste's account. He stated that he'd been summoned to Bellamont House, shown the missing brooch, and had accompanied Madame Laval to the quarters, where the jewelry was discovered in Rose's possession. It was a clear case of theft, he said. The evidence was undeniable. Rose was not permitted to testify in her own defense. Louisiana law prohibited enslaved people from testifying against white citizens. Her court-appointed attorney, a young man who had been practicing law for less than a year and who clearly wished to be anywhere but that courtroom, offered a perfunctory argument that the evidence was circumstantial and that there was no proof Rose had taken the brooch. His heart was not in it, and everyone present could see that. The judge was preparing to deliver the inevitable guilty verdict when Henri Laval stood up. "Your Honor," he said, his voice rough, "I wish to address the court." The room fell silent. Celeste turned sharply toward her husband, alarm flashing across her face. She recognized that tone, knew something was about to break. She half rose from her seat, as if she might stop him. But it was too late. Henri walked to the front of the courtroom. He looked at Rose, standing in the dock with her hands bound, her face blank because she had learned long ago that showing emotion was dangerous. He looked at his wife, rigid in her seat, her eyes promising consequences. He looked at the judge, at the crowd, at the society he had spent his life trying to earn acceptance from. And then he made his choice. "The girl is innocent," Henri said clearly. "The brooch was not stolen. It was misplaced. My wife was mistaken." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge struck his gavel for silence. Celeste had gone pale, then flushed deep red, her hands gripping the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles blanched. "Monsieur Laval," the judge said carefully, "are you certain? This is a serious statement to retract. Are you saying that your wife has lied to this court?" Henri hesitated. He could feel Celeste's eyes burning into him. He felt the full weight of what he was doing. If he continued, if he publicly contradicted her, he would humiliate her before the entire parish. Their marriage would be destroyed. His reputation would suffer. People would begin to ask why he was so determined to protect this particular enslaved girl. But if he stopped now, Rose would be convicted. She would be sent to the state prison or sold to a chain gang or transported farther south, where conditions were even harsher. She would suffer, perhaps die, because of his cowardice. Henri thought of the night he had visited Rose in jail, of the way she had looked at him with his own eyes and told him he was choosing his comfort over her freedom. He thought of Dinah, Rose's mother, whom he had used and abandoned. He thought of all the choices he had made, all the ways he had failed to be the man he should have been. "I am saying," Henri said slowly, "that there has been a misunderstanding. The brooch was not stolen. I asked the court to dismiss the charges and release the girl into my custody." The judge looked at Celeste, frozen in her seat, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. He looked at Henri, standing straight backed, his head held high, more resolute than anyone had seen him in years. And the judge, a practical man who understood he was witnessing the public collapse of one of the parish's most prominent marriages, made the only decision available to him. "The charges are dismissed," he said, striking the gavel. "The defendant is released." Rose was unbound and led from the dock. She stood there for a moment, not quite believing what had happened, not daring to trust that she was truly free. Then Henri stepped toward her and said quietly, "Come with me." They walked out of the courthouse together, father and daughter, while the crowd whispered and stared. Celeste remained seated, too shocked and too furious to move. She had been publicly contradicted by her husband, made to appear either a liar or a fool, and stripped the revenge she had been carefully planning for weeks. The humiliation was complete. The carriage ride back to Bellamont House was silent. Rose sat in the back. Henri and Celeste sat in front, the space between them charged with unspoken rage. When they arrived, Celeste went directly to her room and locked the door. Henri went to his study. Rose was sent back to the quarters. but the other enslaved people looked at her with a mixture of awe and fear, sensing that something fundamental had shifted, even if they did not yet understand what it meant. What came next arrived 3 days later, in the form of a bill of sale and a letter. Henri spent those 3 days in his study, drinking brandy, writing correspondence, and making arrangements. He did not speak to Celeste, who remained locked in her room, refusing food and refusing to see anyone. He did not speak to Rose, who stayed in the quarters, waiting for whatever fate would come next. On the 3rd day, Henri summoned Rose to his study. She came reluctantly, still unable to trust that anything had truly changed, still expecting some new punishment or betrayal. Henri stood by the window when she entered, gazing out over the cotton fields stretching to the horizon. He did not turn to face her. "I've arranged for you to be sold," he said without preamble, "to a family in Texas, the Harpers. They are respectable people, known to treat their slaves reasonably well. You will leave tomorrow." A cold weight settled in Rose's stomach. So this was it. She had been spared prison only to be sold away, sent to strangers in a distant state. It was better than jail, perhaps, but it was still exile, still punishment. "I understand," she said quietly. "No," Henri said, finally, turning to face her. "You don't understand. The sale, it's a fiction. The Harpers are abolitionists. They'll take you to Texas, and from there, they'll help you reach Mexico. Once you're across the border, you can stay there or make your way north to the free states. You'll be free, Rose, truly free." Rose stared at her father, hardly able to comprehend what she was hearing. "Free?" "Yes," Henri said. He opened a drawer in his desk and took out a small leather pouch. "This is for you. $200 in gold coins. It's the price I paid for you 5 years ago. It isn't enough. Nothing could ever be enough. But it's what I can give you. Use it to begin your life wherever you choose." He held the pouch out to her, and Rose accepted it with trembling hands. She opened it and saw the gold coins glinting inside, more money than she had ever imagined holding. "There's also this," Henri said, handing her a sealed document. "A letter of manumission, signed and notarized. It states that you've been freed by your owner. It isn't entirely legal. Technically, Celeste owns you, not me, and she hasn't signed anything, but it should protect you if anyone questions you. And once you're out of Louisiana, it won't matter anyway." Rose looked from the letter to the gold, then to her father's face. She saw the guilt there, the shame, and the desperate need to believe that this single act might somehow make amends for 7 years of fear and cruelty. "Why now?" she asked. "Why are you doing this now, after all this time?" Henri was silent for a long moment. "Because I saw you in that courtroom," he said finally. "I saw what I had done to you, what I had allowed to be done to you. And I realized that if I didn't act then, if I let you be convicted and sent away, I would never be able to live with myself. I've made many mistakes, Rose. I've been weak and selfish and cowardly. But I can do this one thing. I can give you your freedom." "What about Madam?" Rose asked. "What will she do when she finds out?" "I don't know," Henri admitted. "She'll be furious. She may leave me. She may divorce me. She may make my life unbearable. But that's my problem, not yours. You'll be gone. You'll be free. And that's what matters." Rose studied her father for a long moment. She thought of her mother left behind in Mississippi, of 7 years of servitude and humiliation, of all the ways Henri had failed her. And she thought of this moment, of the fact that he was finally doing the right thing, even if it could never undo all the harm that had been done. "Thank you," she said quietly. It was not forgiveness. She wasn't sure she could ever forgive him, but it was an acknowledgement, recognition that he was trying, in his limited way, to make amends. Henri nodded. He looked as though he wanted to say more, perhaps to embrace her or offer some final apology or advice. But he didn't. The distance between them was too great, the damage too deep. Instead, he said only, "The Harpers will be here tomorrow morning. Be ready." Rose left the study. and returned to the quarters. She told no one what had been said, nothing about the plan, the gold, or the letter hidden carefully in her dress. She packed her few belongings and waited for morning. The Harpers arrived at dawn. They were a quiet, middle-aged couple who conducted their business with Henri swiftly and without unnecessary words. The bill of sale was signed, the money exchanged, and Rose was loaded into their wagon along with supplies for the journey. As the wagon pulled away from Bellum House, Rose looked back one last time at the place that had been her prison for 7 years. She saw Henri standing on the gallery, watching her go. Their eyes met across the distance, and Rose lifted her hand in a small gesture. Neither quite a wave nor a farewell, but an acknowledgement. Henri raised his hand in return. Then the road curved, and Bellum House vanished from sight. The journey to Texas took 2 weeks. The Harpers treated Rose with kindness, not as property but as a person. They explained their plan. They would take her to their home near the Texas-Mexico border, and from there help her cross into Mexico. They had contacts there, people who could help her find work, establish herself, begin a life. Rose listened with a sense of unreality. Freedom had been an abstract idea for so long, a fantasy she barely allowed herself to imagine. Now it was unfolding before her, and she struggled to grasp it. They reached the Harpers' ranch in late August. It was small, isolated, far from towns and the attention of authorities. The Harpers gave Rose a room, fed her, and treated her with a gentleness she had almost forgotten existed. After a few days of rest, they helped her cross the border into Mexico. Rose spent the next year in a small town in northern Mexico, working as a seamstress and learning Spanish. She used Henri's gold carefully, saving most of it as she established herself. In 1853, she decided to continue north to the United States, to the free states where slavery was illegal. The journey was long and dangerous. Rose traveled with a group of other formerly enslaved people, following routes and safe houses of the Underground Railroad. She moved through Texas, the Indian Territory, Kansas, and Missouri. She saw things that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Slave catchers, bounty hunters, the constant terror of capture and return to bondage. But she also encountered kindness. She met people, black and white, who risked their own safety to help those fleeing slavery. She stayed in homes where families had runaways and cellars and attics, where food and clothing were given freely, where strangers became allies in the struggle for freedom. Rose reached Illinois in the spring of 1854, nearly 2 years after leaving Bellum House. She settled in a small town with a community of free black people and former slaves, people who had made similar journeys and understood what she had endured. She used the last of Henri's gold to buy a small plot of land and establish a dressmaking business. Over the following years, Rose built a life. She married a man named James, a former slave from Kentucky who had escaped to freedom 5 years earlier. Together they had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. Rose taught her children to read and sew, to value education and independence, and to remember where they had come from without allowing the past to define their future. Daughters to read and write, skills that had been denied to her for most of her life. She taught them to sew, passing down the craft her own mother had taught her, and she taught them pride, to hold their heads high, to never accept that they were less than anyone else. Rose never returned to Louisiana. She never spoke of Henri Laval or Celeste or Bellum House. When her children asked about her past, she told them only that she had been born in Mississippi and had come north as a young woman. The details, she said, were not important. What mattered was the life she had built, the freedom she had claimed, the future she had secured for her children and their children after them. But she kept the leather pouch Henri had given her, even long after the gold was gone. And she kept the letter of manumission, carefully preserved in a small wooden box. She never showed these items to anyone. Perhaps she kept them as reminders of where she had come from, or perhaps as proof that her freedom had been earned, not granted. Rose lived until 1903, dying at the age of 68, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She lived to see the Civil War end slavery, to witness Reconstruction and its failures, to endure the rise of Jim Crow and the long struggle for genuine equality. But she also lived to see her children grow up free, educated, employed, and able to build lives that would have been impossible for her generation. At her funeral, her eldest daughter spoke of Rose's strength, her resilience, her determination, her refusal to surrender to despair. She did not speak of Rose's past, because she did not know it. The story of Bellamont House, of Henri and Celeste Laval, of the 7 years Rose had spent enslaved in her father's household, remained hidden. It was a secret Rose carried with her to the grave. Rose's departure destroyed what little remained of the Laval marriage. Celeste never forgave Henri for humiliating her publicly in the courtroom, and she never forgave him for freeing Rose. When she discovered that Rose had been sold to abolitionists, that the sale itself had been a fiction designed to secure her freedom, Celeste's rage was absolute. She remained at Bellamont House. Divorce was unthinkable for a woman of her position. Instead, she and Henri became strangers living under the same roof. They ate separately, maintained separate social lives, and spoke only when absolutely necessary. Celeste devoted herself to managing the household and maintaining the plantation's social obligations, preserving her standing in New Orleans society through rigid propriety and sheer force of will. But she was changed, harder, colder, her bitterness visible to everyone, though never spoken aloud. Henry's health declined rapidly after 1852, whether from guilt, stress, or the weight of his own choices. He aged quickly. He continued to oversee his business affairs, but without passion. He drank more, slept less, and spent long hours alone in his study, staring at nothing. Other planners noticed a change and whispered about it, speculating about what had happened between the Lavals, but no one knew the full story. Henri never spoke of it. By 1855, Henri was a shadow of the ambitious young man who had once built a cotton empire. His hands trembled, his face was drawn, and he moved through his days like a ghost. A physician who examined him found nothing physically wrong, attributing his decline to nervous exhaustion and melancholia. But Henri knew the truth. He was dying of guilt, of shame, and of the knowledge that he had spent most of his life being a coward. Henri Laval died in the spring of 1856 at the age of 51. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, which was more accurate than the doctor realized. He was buried in a family plot in New Orleans, his funeral attended by the most prominent families of Louisiana society. Celeste stood at the graveside in black silk, her face composed, accepting condolences with grace and dignity. No one would have guessed that she felt only relief that her husband was finally gone. Celeste inherited everything: the plantation, the enslaved people, the investments, all of Henry's considerable wealth. She managed it with the same cold efficiency she had always shown, but she grew increasingly reclusive. The social position she had guarded so fiercely seemed to matter less after Henry's death. She was seen less often in New Orleans and spent more time alone in a house that had been the setting for so much quiet suffering. When the Civil War began in 1861, Bellamont House, like all Southern plantations, was swept into chaos. Much of Celeste's wealth was tied up in Confederate bonds and currency, which became worthless after the South's defeat. The enslaved people were freed, and many left Bellamont House immediately, heading north or to nearby cities in search of new lives. Judith, the elderly woman who had once tried to protect Rose, was among them. She moved to New Orleans, where she lived until her death in 1870, working as a paid seamstress and never speaking of her years at Bellamont House. Celeste struggled to keep the plantation running in the post-war years, but it was a losing fight. Without enslaved labor, without capital to pay workers, and without the economic structures that had sustained plantation life, Bellamont House fell into decline. The fields went unplanted. The buildings decayed. Celeste grew more isolated with each passing year. Those few who still visited the estate reported that she had become strange. She was sometimes seen wandering through the empty rooms, speaking aloud in French. Former slaves, now hired as paid servants, said she argued with ghosts, with Henri, with her younger self, with the choices that led her to this lonely end. Celeste Dufresne Laval died in 1871 at the age of 62. She was found seated in a chair by her bedroom window, staring out at the overgrown gardens. She had been dead for several days before anyone discovered her. She left no heirs, no will, no instructions. Bellamont House was sold to settle debts and eventually fell into ruin. By the early 20th century, it was nothing more than a foundation and a few crumbling walls, another forgotten monument to the Old South and all its sins. The truth of what happened at Bellamont House remained buried for generations. The record were scattered, the witnesses long dead, the story forgotten. It was not until the 1970s, when a historian researching plantation records in Louisiana came across a bill of sale for a 12-year-old girl named Rose, purchased by Henri Laval in 1847, that the story began to surface again. The historian, a woman named Dr. Patricia Williams, noticed something unusual about the dates and the price listed in the document. Intrigued, she began to dig deeper. Dr. Williams tracked down additional records, the trial transcripts from 1852, correspondence between Celeste and acquaintances in Mississippi, business ledgers from a Mercier plantation, and shipping and financial documents connected to Henri Laval's enterprises. Eventually, through a genealogical research project, she made contact with Rose's descendants in Illinois. Rose's great-granddaughter, a woman named Eleanor, had inherited a small wooden box that had once belonged to Rose. Inside was a leather pouch, now empty, and a letter of manumission signed by Henri Laval. There was also a small notebook written in Rose's own hand. It was not a full memoir, but it contained a brief account of her life, enough to confirm the story Dr. Williams had painstakingly reconstructed from archival records. Dr. Williams published her findings in a scholarly journal in 1978, and the story of Rose and the Laval family entered the historical record. It was taught in universities, discussed in books about slavery in the Antebellum South, and cited as an example of the moral complexities and human tragedies created by the institution of slavery. But for Rose's descendants, it was more than an academic case study. It was their family story, their inheritance. Eleanor and her siblings traveled to Louisiana to see what remained of Bellamont House. They stood among the ruins, crumbling foundations, broken walls, gardens reclaimed by weeds, and tried to imagine what their ancestor had endured there. She survived, Eleanor said, standing where the main house had once risen. That's what matters. She survived, she built a life, and she made sure her children had better. That's her legacy. And Rose's legacy was not the suffering she had endured, but the strength she had shown. It was the life she built, the freedom she claimed, and the future she secured for those who came after her. Her story stands as a testament to human resilience, the ability to endure impossible circumstances and emerge with dignity intact. This story shows how slavery corrupted every human relationship it touched, how it turned ordinary people into instruments of cruelty and transformed families into sites of unspeakable tragedy. It reveals the cost of cowardice, the price of choosing comfort over conscience, and it reminds us that even in the darkest circumstances, even when every system is designed to crush the human spirit, people can endure, they can resist, they can build lives of meaning and dignity. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was truly revealed? Were Henry's final actions enough to redeem him? Or was it too little, too late? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more dark historical mysteries like this one, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who loves forgotten stories from America's past. See you in the next video.